This conference will now be recorded.
September to order. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chairman Paul Yella. First item on the agenda is the roll call and determination forum with Stacy Klein.
From Stafford County, Alex Oziak,
Here.
Brandon Brown,
Here.
Ryan Council. From King George County, Nick Minor. Kimberly Wilson. From Caroline County, Mike Fincham. Craig Pennington. Spotsylvania County, Paul Agnello.
Here.
Rodney White.
I think Rodney was going to be online.
Yeah. Not yet. Jacob Pathwick. Leon Hughes. From Fred Transit, Dean Clark.
Here.
Craig Reed. From the city of Fredericksburg, Jamie Jackson. Bassam Amin.
Here.
Mike Craig. From DRPT, Sierra Williams. Todd Horsley. From VDOT, Michelle Shropshire. Stephen Haynes.
Here.
Jim Ponticello.
Here.
Dan Grinnell.
Here.
From BRE, Christine Hoffner.
Here.
Nick Ruiz.
Here.
From Federal Highway, Ivan Rucker. From PRTC, Bob Schneider.
Here.
Joe Stainsby.
Here.
From GW Right Connect, Kate Gibson. Here. Lee Anderson. And FTA vacant positions. That includes roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Great. So the third item on the agenda is the approval of the April 13th Technical Advisory Committee agenda. Does anyone have any comments or changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion for approval?
Motion for approval?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passed. Fourth item on the agenda is the approval of the August 2nd, 2021 TAC meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes, and does anyone have any comments or changes to the minutes?
Motion to approve?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. The fifth item is review of the August 16th, 2021 Policy Committee meeting with FAMPO Administrator Ian Holtz.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll ask Matthew just to pull up the policy committee agenda from the last meeting there so you can just see it. We did a presentation on the FAMPO Transportation Improvement Survey, which was very successful. You saw that presentation at the last meeting. The LRTP update, we're going to discuss that today. You've also seen that smart scale update. The item that was discussed in our last meeting, the Fred park and ride and parking lot purchase, land acquisition going into the tip. The appointment of Mr. Rodney Thomas to the CTAC. Then we went into a closed session, basically that allowed us to discuss the proposals for new on-call contracts via the RFP, which you all have seen and discussed a number of times. Matthew, if you just scroll down. And the policy committee approved a resolution to appoint 3 new on-call contracts with Michael Baker, VHP, and Cambridge Systematics. attorneys have just reviewed all the details and we're now ready to sign. Those contracts will go up, I believe, today for those consultants to sign and for the interim executive director of GWRC to also sign so that those contracts become live. And then FAMPO has got 3 on-call consultants that we'll be able to use in the future, which we're really excited about. The notice of intent to award was approved at that meeting. And then just correspondence to staff agency reports. So those are the key items that were discussed in the meeting. As you know, I don't like to belabor the point because some of you attend both meetings and I don't want to, overlay what
That's a great summary, Ian. And I just had a quick question with the on-call consultants. Do FAMPO and GWC have the ability to hire, or I guess, use any of them for a task order?
Yeah.
Or are they looking at priority order, like you have to use one for everything?
There's no priority order, and the policy committee chair specifically asked if we would try to get estimates from more than one consultant when we do issue a task order. So there is no priority order in terms of issuing contracts. We did score them, so some would have scored higher than others when we did the scoring, but there's no particular priority in terms of having to issue a task order to somebody first before issuing it to somebody else. The GWRC attorneys have also looked through all of the contracts, the RFP and the final contract, which they will have to sign, and we got the final comments from the attorneys on Friday, so we're quite ready to go ahead and sign it.
Yeah, sounds great. Good job.
Ian?
So the next item is public
Excuse me.
comment. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, just a question. So those contracts, are other agencies able to access those contracts through any kind of cooperative agreement? Are there any provisions in?
So the RFP hasn't specifically got provisions for outside entities to use them, but Kate from GWRC, the person has to actually action them. So I defer to Kate to make a comment on that if she would.
Yeah, so we talked to our attorney, the RFP did not include a rider clause, so it would not allow others to then contract with our on-calls through our RFP. We might be able to coordinate where GRC could contract for a project on behalf of a partner agency, but we would have to discuss that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ian? All right, the next item on the agenda is number 6, public comments. Do we have any members from the public who wish to speak? Can people online speak?
Yes.
Is there anything online? Is there anyone online who wishes to speak during public comment? Okay, hearing none, we will go to the next agenda item, which is 7 action discussion items. The first item is item A, the CURES 5307 funding discussion with Dr. Bob Schneider.
Good morning, all. There's nothing more exciting on a lovely Monday morning than talking about federal funding and acts of legislation that all intermingle and confuse each other. This is a presentation that I gave at the, was it FAMPO or GWC? It all blends together sometimes. It was FAMPO a couple weeks ago. And this was in relation to the 5307 funding, but it's CARES money. So what I want to do is there's a lot of confusion around 5307, what it is, what it does, and just give a simple breakdown. So moving forward, nice mind controllers.
You're welcome to, if you would like, Brian.
Here we go, that's me, presentation. Okay, so what this is really about, there's 3 federal grants that came through out of the COVID-19 project. The first one was the CARES Act. This one was the very first one 18 months ago. This was that legislative move, 2.2 trillion, 25 billion set aside for transit agencies. Massive reductions in ridership. The main issue was suddenly we're trying to buy PPE, we're trying to bolt stuff on buses, we're doing signage at train stations, and we're trying to not lay drivers off. Imagine hundreds of thousands of people being unemployed suddenly. This was a way to do that and still provide transportation in cities. There was no direct mechanism. There was no coronavirus template to go back in time and go, oh, let's give out money this way. So they used a pipeline, which is 5307 and 5311 apportionments. You hear those numbers tossed around enough a lot. Where do they come from? It really is from the United States Code. So Section 49 of the US Code, Chapter 53 is public transportation. Literally, if you click on all of these, it explains everything. They are in order by creation of policy. So for example, some are missing. I'm trying to think of one that's disappeared. 5328 was repealed, and sometimes they just get replaced or rolled into something else. So in this instance, for example, more recent federal policy is 5339 grants for bus and bus facilities and 5337 state of good repair. State of good repair didn't emerge until the Obama administration in transit. So that's an example where you can map policy through all these numbers. 5307 has been around for a while. It's the urbanized formula grants, and then formula grants for rural areas. I'm assuming we all know formula grants, but in transit, it's predominantly a mix of your census population combined with your vehicle miles traveled and your ridership. So what is that blend? What's great about these grants is it's the more you run, the more money you get back. It's incentive driven by the federal government, by a policy nature, and they are not interested in funding your operations. So this goes back to the Reagan administration and the interpretation of this, just to get an understanding. When the original formula grants came out in the 60s and 70s, you could use them for pretty much anything you needed to. When the Reagan administration came in, FTA said, wait a minute. We're providing, federal government's giving money to localities when it's up to localities to fund their local services. The federal government said, we'll give you assets. For example, we'll build you a road, but it's up to you to maintain it, et cetera, et cetera. We'll give you cop cars, but you got to hire the police to go in it. It's a philosophical shift, and the federal government has kept that philosophy since then. So it very much is toward capital programs and maintenance of assets. But CARES is different because this wasn't about buying buses. Why buy more rail cars for VRE when you don't have passengers on them? You're trying to not lay off conductors, right? I mean, it just didn't make sense, but this was the pipeline. So historically, 5307, you can't do these things. Two things happened. Number one, they pushed the money out through a formula and they shoved it into the UZAs of the urbanized areas. It didn't go to VRE, it didn't go to WMATA, it went to the urbanized area. So go anywhere in the country with a UZA, that's where the money went. Then it had to be subdivided by whatever formula or mechanism that existed. And what's really strange is they didn't put a spending deadline. I just don't think they had the time, they didn't know what was gonna happen. So they just didn't put that cap on it. And that was the first tranche. So this was, I think we all assumed when this started, we'd be done by like October, a year ago. Well, we figured out pretty quickly it wasn't working. So there wasn't a vaccine, it was spreading, the response, they came up with CRISA, which was passed in December of 2020. I think like the 28th, I mean, it was post-Christmas. 14 million for transit and allocated with CARES, but there's some oddball things that had to be adjusted. There were transit systems in like the UZA in Oregon that got like 3 times their operating budget. Just because the way they're organized, they have a high capital volume and they got a ton of money. And a good example is VRE. They receive a lot of capital money because they're capital centric. OmniRide, we're operating centric. We don't get as much capital. So we ended up kind of flipped. So what they did is they came up with some rules and it said you can't have more money than 75% of your operating expenses. So if you're a $100 million a year organization, for your operating expenses in 2018, but you got $100 million, you can't have any more money under CRISA. So you're going to leave $25 million on the table. Well, one of the ways to get around that was, and this is something VRE very wisely did, is they refunded the subsidies back to the local jurisdictions. So inside the jurisdiction, inside the budgets for every single member of VRE, in terms of the funding program, they got a refund. So Spotsylvania County, Stafford, Fredericksburg, Manassas Park got a credit back into their fund for how they fund VRE. That allowed VRE to draw down that delta because they didn't truly receive it. It was a credit back. So one of the key things and one of the key takeaways for your elected leaders, just for mine, you have already received the benefit of CARES/CRISA by this refund credit back into the pool. So you've already got the cash. It's done. DRE's taken the action. The drawdowns haven't happened, but in terms of the transactional approval, you've got the cash. You've already benefited in your locality. So congratulations. It's a good thing, right? So that means, so if I'm, for example, Fredericksburg, there's more money back in that motor fuel tax pool because they gave a credit. I can now use that to build a sidewalk. Or I can use that to fix whatever is eligible under the motor fuels program. I can also now allocate more funds to Fred if necessary. So Fredericksburg, Stafford, and Spotsylvania all had refunds in the motor fuels tax. I mentioned them because that is the 3 organizations that help fund VRE out of this fund. ARPA, we don't know if they're going to call it ARP or ARPA. Congress is still trying to decide because they love their acronyms. But 26.1 billion, again, another tranche of cash. Mostly the same rules, but there's a couple of nuances. This time they put a deadline on spending. So this means we're actually going to spend new money before old money, right? Because now there's a deadline. So if you've got $1 million laying out there that has no deadline, and $1 million that has to be spent by the 24th or 2024, what are you going to do? You're going to spend that cash first. What was also recognized is this is a recovery package. So this isn't about like sudden aid to transit systems or cities. This was about trying to help government agencies recover and communities recover. So they put in money for 5310, which is the senior disability. That's where the United Way type programs or your senior center or community on aging, that's where that money goes. And I believe DRPT manages that on behalf of this area. So that's where that 5310 cash comes in. So if you're from Caroline County looking around going, how can this money help me? It's going to be by working with the state to help you as a resource of where to spend that cash or access that cash. The bottom 2 really don't apply to anything we're talking about. CIG, that's trying to build rail. New Starts is light rail, et cetera. I don't think we're putting in light rail between Golding and Summer Dock anytime soon. So if you don't know where those are, you would, well, that's funny. But it really doesn't apply to us. But again, they're trying to spur economic development and growth. They were trying to address issues of massive unemployment and opportunities because, as you know, there's also there would be an infrastructure package that come later. So this is kind of a 1-2 punch in terms of money coming in place in March 2021 to be followed up hopefully by a decent infrastructure package that benefits regions. This formula is more complex. I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but they don't want agencies receiving more than 132% of your operating costs. But if it does exceed that, then there's some limitations of it in which you can do reapportionment. It's still being figured out and worked out, but it comes to the UZA, not the individual agencies. So they're not looking at whether or not VRE got more than 132% or OmniRide got 132%. They're looking at the UZAs, and that's the key distinction. So putting it all together, you've got CARES, CRISA, and ARPA. Period. These are very different in that they are not capital centric, they are operating centric. So who operate that's for transit? So who operates transit in the footprint? Those 3 agencies, us, OmniRide, VRE, and our dear friends at Fred. No planning cash. You cannot spend money on planning with one exception. If you are doing lefts and rights, so you're reorganizing routes, and reorganizing routes is not, oh, we're going to do a study for this. No, it's because you're addressing it in terms of service recovery or equity. One of the big issues that came out over the last year is looking at transit routes and going, hey, low-income communities, communities of color are underserved. One of the first things we do is we cut unproductive routes. Can we go back in and relook at these and maybe do things a little bit better? Can we have improved coverage? And that's one of the things that they attempted to do with this. And that's only for ARP money. You can't use the planning, you can't use CARES and CRISA for planning, period. You can spend money on capital if you have no layoffs. And then the 5307 rules apply. So a great example, us, VRE, I don't think, Fred, you guys had any layoffs. So the three of us, if we are flush with cash for whatever reason, and we look around and go, I need more buses, VRE wants to build a station, Jay wants to put in a garage or do some facility, that money can be converted. But as soon as you get to fill out some forms, right, you have to get FTA approval. But as soon as that happens, all 5307 rules apply. You can't say, oh, well, I'm going to use the operating expenses for the parking attendant in the parking garage, right? And you can't do it. You're either treating it as recovery money or you're treating it as capital money. And again, the reason the feds want that is it's by policy choice. Policy choice is helping systems recover and maintain their operations or move it into investment of infrastructure as designed, because this is recovered as part of that process. So I don't make all this stuff up. The rules of the spending, there are 160 questions from FTA, and I'm going to go over all of them in extreme, excruciating detail. Kidding, of course. Put the links to all this information at the end of the presentation, so a nice sweet copy paste gets you where you want to be. Here's the key. You can use it for all operating activities, net fare revenues. Okay, so if you lost fare, you can use this money to offset your fare. So OmniRide, we are predominantly a commuter services, VRE as well. We lost about, last fiscal year, I think we lost like about $4.5 million in fares just in 4 months. We book about $1 million a month in fares. So this hit in March, April, May, June, we were in trouble. So that's what that did. Plus we had to buy PPE, right? So if we're an organization that if you look at your revenues, you have federal, state, local, and passenger fare revenues, federal, state, and local were fine, but the passenger fare says. But we also had to buy PPE. So we didn't lay anybody off, we kept payroll flat. Our issue was the revenue loss, we backfilled it there, and we also had our hit on the motor fuels tax, but we didn't see that till later. So our CARES money backfilled that, then we were able to cover operating expenses. Here's the key. In general, costs necessary to operate, maintain, and manage public transit systems. Not philosophy of transit, not philosophy of mobility, or big picture planning of developments, et cetera. Operating expenses are driver salaries, fuel, conductors, signage, toilet paper, technically. I mean, it's just what does it take to keep the building running? But how many of us put in hand sanitizer? We have driver barriers. We have masks that we provide to customers along with operators, employees, gloves, all those different things. So is there a limit for operating expenses? No. You can spend as much as you need to on operating expenses out of this money. The feds don't care. It must be a valid operating expense. So I can't do on-call consultants to do a mobility plan, right? Because that's not eligible as an operating expense. But if you have not furloughed any employee, you can convert it over. Some of this is going to be echoed, but the reason it's echoed is because it asks it in different ways. Well, can I spend it in other ways other than payroll and operations? Only if you haven't furloughed an employee, and it still becomes 53%. Funding, what constitutes payroll and operations? You know, I've got a staff member that oversees the transportation component. Therefore, you know, that's supporting. No. Examples of expenses include conductors, operators, crew members, route schedulers, dispatchers. Well, I do some planning to help draw up left and rights. You're not, unless you're running the transit system, unless your direct work product runs the transit system, it's not eligible. The key is the labor must be at one of those transit systems to have that eligibility criteria. Takeaways, it's emergency money, right? It was designed to prevent mass layoffs. It was designed to build budgets for PPE. It was designed to help out with passenger fare loss, motor fuels tax loss. Transit systems around the country rely on sales tax. Some of them have hotel motel taxes, or they have prepared meals taxes. If any of those hit, your budgets were wiped out during March, April, May of last year. It is operations money. Yes, labor, yes, fuel, PPE, enhanced cleaning. You can subcontract out. So we have done that. We subcontracted out enhanced cleaning in a number of areas. And you can't capitalize unless there's been no layoffs, and then it's converted and treated as 5307 funds. And again, that ARPA money has a spending deadline. So examples of just what I described. We kept our local service 100%. We scaled back our commuter services, and we had drivers on like A shift and B shift. So drivers would drive Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 week, and then the next week they would drive Tuesday, Thursday. And it was just an offsetting schedule, getting in training, lots of other things done, and we were able to go zero fare on local service. We haven't collected any cash in our fare boxes since about St. Patrick's Day of 2020. We've migrated to a cashless system on our commuter services, which are still running. We are zero fare in local services now. And of course, we've gone ahead and done all the fun stuff of controlled door access so that people just can't randomly walk in and get buzzed in, et cetera. I think we all understand that. When you do your drawdowns, it has to be for those direct expenses, not future expenses. It is a reimbursable, and it has to be under those key categories. PPE, increased labor, you've got to provide invoicing, you've got to do all the typical things you would do if you were seeking a reimbursement. And again, passenger fares net. So if you're collecting all your money back from your passenger fares, then you're not able to dip into this money. So some transit systems, they didn't know that ARPA was going to come. So they put their fares back in on January 1. They've been collecting fares. Local ridership bounced back pretty quick. It really did. Commuter services is what suffered the most, us and BRE in particular in the DC area. DC WMATA trains, they're relatively empty, except the routes that go to the Pentagon, et cetera, because they can't do secure DoD work from your living room. So that makes some obvious sense. There has been a loss of net motor fuels tax. What was interesting is it wasn't as bad as we thought, and it didn't last as long as we thought. It was really bad like March and April. But by May, everyone was back. People were just driving around. You're supposed to be working from home, but I guess that includes a Home Depot run. I don't know. But we'll check the cool stuff. But again, loss of net toll revenues as well. So how does this apply? I-66 inside the Beltway money, for example. We have funds. We had routes that are paid for by that. That's $7 million loss. Ooh. So we had routes that we couldn't get reimbursed from because there wasn't money in the fund for I-66 inside the Beltway. So we used our federal funds to help cover the cost of those routes, knowing that we would have to seek, and we just then reduced the services to match accordingly. 160 Q&A, they're broken down by, for example, and again, this is all in your agenda, copy paste. There's a really good slideshow in here, and what it does is it's a continuing slide deck. So FTA did the first slide deck and for CARES, then they did CRISA, then they did ARPA. So you don't have to go hunting through pieces of legislation. They've really conceptually put these as a continuum of legislative spending money rules. And 160 questions, it could be 161 by now. Because what happens is someone will submit a question, and the question is good, and they'll put it in different areas. They'll put it under NEPA, they'll put it under civil rights, they'll put it under triennial review or labor. So for example, do I have to have sign off of these from the unions? Well, technically yes, because these are federal grants. So you still have to go through the DOL process. So DOL, like the Department of Labor, if you don't know, if you have a unionized workforce as part of your agreement and the feds give you money, there has to be an approval by the union that says, yes, we support this grant. They can actually fight it, and then it goes through the administrative process. 99.9% of the time it's fine, because this is money that buys buses, drivers love buses, improved train cars. It benefits the organization, so generally labor organizations support that. But this is one of those things where it all applies. So those are the heavy highlights. Again, takeaways are you've already received benefit, especially through that CRISA allocation. And don't forget, localities also did receive significant chunks of change from ARP as well. So any questions that I can offer or clarify?
That's a great presentation, Dr. Bob. I have a couple basic questions, just with the Carissa and the ARP kind of funding. Did you ever receive those?
So no, we have not formally received them
Okay.
because quite frankly, it's a bit of a mess in terms of the calculations. We fall under the UZA out of DC,
Okay.
then breaks the money down into MTA, Maryland Transportation Administration, WMATA, and then PRTC. PRTC then stands for Fred, Omniride, and VRE. So there's a split letter of those amounts have to be done. There just hasn't been that big push, and that's something that we're going to be working through over the next 30 days to get that done. I'll say this, about $250 million. Is that the right number? No, it's more than it's 2.5 billion. And these three pieces of legislation came to the DC UZA. It's a lot of money. I think WMATA got 2.1 billion of that. It's silly money when you think about it just from perspective of, I'm not used to, other than statewide budget information, you don't think about transit and Ds when we talk about projects like this. But think how many thousands of employees that Metro has. You know, that's why that ink is so expensive. The good news is we should have that worked out in the next 45 days, and then that'll all be published, and we'll happily share that information. It's called the split letter. It's super complex.
Right.
Kind of a black hole, I hate to say.
So with the Carissa and the ARP, will they have a deadline?
Krista, no.
Okay.
ARPA, yes. And the deadline will be, I believe it has to be obligated by September 30th, 2024.
So with the CARES and the Carissa, the GWC could take years to allocate it if they wanted to?
You could never spend it.
And that doesn't look bad to FTA or?
Oh, it looks very bad. Yeah. So to be clear, it's just one of the rules. So just a little bit of feedback. We're going through this. I was on a call with Senator Warren's office. Normally I have a call at 10:30, so I don't have a hard stop this morning like I normally do. But they're like, hey, you guys aren't drawing down your cash. I'm like, correct. We don't even know what we've lost yet. What do you mean? Well, the motor fuels tax gets collected for the month of March. It gets reported in the month of April. Department of Revenue for the state then reconciles and then reports it. It's a 3 to 4 month lag for us before we even know we lost. Plus, we're on a reimbursable basis. We don't even know what we've spent on PPE yet. So there were some transit systems who had incurred millions of dollars in expenses. They just hadn't drawn the money down from FTA because, quite frankly, they had reserves and they could live off their reserves temporarily and then do the drawdown. Where the reason so much money went into the hopper later is because the October, November, they started to see these $1 million drawdowns. And that was the big deal. So it does look bad if you're not spending the money. That's one of the reasons why we specifically, along with VRE, obviously we want some spread dollars allocated potentially, but spending that dollar, even if you're going to convert it to 5307, converting it and letting FTA know allows them to have the updates in their federal reporting system, because then the congressional staff can go in and look at it and go, oh, VRE is using this money to build a station, or Omniride's going to buy some buses. It gives them some pipeline information. If it just sits there as the unknown, it looks like we got more money than we don't. But it's not that situation at all. Every transit system in the region can take advantage of this that benefits the public and benefits the localities especially.
So with PRTC and VRE, did they spend their CARES Act funding?
We are almost through CARES. So we're down to the very edge trickle of CARES, and that's why we're just going to be such a big push for us to now activate Grissom.
Okay.
Christine, on the VRE side of things, and they don't have anywhere near the operating.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of it's track access fees. So much of their operating expenses are technically capitalized expenses. So it's an operating expense that you can get recovery from federal money for. So like a track access fee or a building lease, for example, those are recoverable under capital money, but they're still technically, you would think of them as operating. So in this case, they might get those funds and then extend them in a different way, preserving that money to then buy a rail car or station.
So this might be more of a question for Gabe, but what are the next steps with allocating the GWC CARES Act funding?
So I just want to go back first, so that amount that I had at the very beginning, the 3.6 million, I think it is, that's all CARES Act funding, correct?
Yes.
And we don't expect for GWC to get CRISA or FAMPO.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. So the reason that this money was brought in, it was tied to the earnings of the FAMPO Alliance money. So there isn't any additional FAMPO Alliance earnings out of CRISA or ARPA. So that's how those earnings were calculated.
Yeah, so just want to clarify that there's not more money coming, it's just the 3.6 for the GWC pot. As far as next steps, so we had included in the GWC packet for last month, letters from ERE, Omniride, and Fred about how this funding could be applied to their jurisdictional subsidy amount. Basically replace the jurisdictional subsidy amount so that they would get that money back. So for VRE and Omniride, that's gas tax money. For Fred, that would be local dollars, I believe. So I think the next step is for the GWC board to determine how they want to go about doing that. In my mind, as long as in any of those situations, allocating $1 of CARES Act funding replaces $1 of essentially local funding. I don't know that it matters who it's allocated to, it's more of an administrative exercise. So that's kind of where we are right now is, we need to staff needs to bring a recommendation back to the university board about how to move forward. But ultimately, the goal is to use the CARES Act funding to replace local funding so that local funding can be applied to them.
So with PRTC, kind of, there's a little kind of table kind of at the end, which has like 3 FAMPO jurisdictions, kind of how much funding can be reduced. Is there something like that being created for Fred and VRE?
So I think Fred has just said they would be able to accept up to the full amount, the 3.6 million. For VRE and Omniride, I know Omniride included a table of what they expect the FY23 jurisdictional subsidies to be. So basically, FY22 is taken care of. So now we're looking at FY23. So Omniride and VRE, I think both included in their letters, basically a look back to previous years to say, we don't know exactly what our FY23 budget is going to be, but here's our estimate based on FY22, or I think Omniride included 3 projects.
So for perspective on this, the jurisdictional subsidies are generally paid out of the motor fuel tax. So I'll give you an example. An action could be to put all of this money in the motor fuel tax fund. But if you do that, then you conform to the rules of the motor fuel tax fund. So don't do that. Yes, sir.
I mean, the point is this money is not technically going to pass through any process of FAMPO, right? This is a process which CWRC is going to deal with, which will pay money back to jurisdictions,
Correct.
But not by FAMPO. So it's not technically a FAMPO issue. This is the GWRC versus the jurisdictions. Say, for example, Fredericksburg or Spotsylvania will get funding out of this by GWRC. It's not going to come from FAMPO policy committee or to the TAC or any disbursement, right?
Right, this is a GWC action, it's relevant to this group in that when GWC allocates this CARES Act funding, the 3 FAMPO jurisdictions are ultimately going to get money back from whatever pot we're replacing with this funding.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so for example, if I'm thinking, as a technical bureaucrat, my perspective would be don't put a motor fuels tax because then it controls motor fuels tax. Instead, set this up as a fund that is spent first, motor fuels tax is second. So whenever you have an eligible expense, which is transit operation, Fred, VRE, or Omniride, anytime you have an expense for one of those 3 agencies, spend first. Then touch your motor fuels fund. That's the simplest way to do it. It preserves your cash longer for you as a locality, and then You know, it's like, well, then I don't get to spend something else. Well, you know what? You don't have to worry about that because if the motor fuels tax fund runs dry, you don't have to steal from libraries to pay for it. You have two sources of revenue to pay for those essential services automatically. One, which is just, and then again, there's no timeline on it. Even though I would spend this first, spend your motor fuels tax money second. You're like, well, why? I don't, you know, neither of them have a deficit technically. Motor fuels tax money, you can hold that money till the end of time and then do one super project. So both of these fit that same bill. So it just makes sense to preserve your motor fuels tax, let that build, because it's also an interest-bearing account. So as that money sits, this money's reimbursable. Once you needed to expend it, then you get it. So spend it first only when you have the cost incurred. So when you send that check to Fred, then you've got basically, this is the reimbursement. We sent $1 million to Fred, then apply to FTA to get your $1 million.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, so what Fred does is in the jurisdictions, just as an FYI, last year when we gave you your budget letters, FY22, we told you how much you would have paid if we did not have CARES Act money. Let's say it was $100,000. Then we told you we're gonna offset your local match for the operating expenses. The capital projects were different, but we said operating expenses, now you only have to give us $30,000 because that's what we need to do the capital match. So we tell you what we use your local dollars for operating, and you just don't have to pay those dollars because that's what we use the CARES Act money for. So when you're thinking about FY23, just know once we've gone through a budget process, we've showed you what you would have paid per se in your quarterly payment to the agency, less CARES Act funding. So you actually do see that delta.
I thought there were some restrictions on the use of capital, the funding for capital improvements, that there had to still be some relationship to COVID impacts. Is that not the case?
It's not been codified anywhere I've seen that it has to be tied to that.
Okay.
You can pay for capital, you can pay for capital items if it has a COVID attack. So for example, if everyone in your building worked in a room like this, and suddenly you need to put up walls or put in air filtration systems or upgrade your HVAC, those are all capital items. You could spend that, you could treat that operating money as capital.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, what they're saying with this money is if you can't spend it in operating or COVID mitigation, you can convert it into true 5307 funds.
Okay.
Yeah, we did a bunch of capital spending directly related to COVID that was capital centric, even though it was a reimbursable. COVID mitigation is the way to think about it.
But it's not exclusive to COVID mitigation. It can be used for just general capital purposes if you do not have a COVID-related operating or capital use.
Correct. I'll give you a quick example. Las Vegas, when the first wave of money came in for CARES, they're like, perfect, now we have the money for our light rail. Congressman, that's not what it's quite used for. You're not going to lay off all the employees to build your light rail program. They went, okay, fair enough, that makes sense. But now they have enough revenue that they're likely going to use their ARPA money to fund a chunk of their light rail because now it's a recovery package and that's their intent. Now, they haven't formally taken that action, but that's stuff that's the paper and the industry information.
Thank you.
So I do want to mention one more time, I think this is super important that gets overlooked. What do all these numbers mean? Where do they come from? It's not complex, it's the US code, this is all clickable. And it's just, again, everyone says it, but it's true. It will put you to sleep. It is dull, it is boring. You need a gloss for your terms. You'll need your laptop, an iPad, and a phone to look these things up. But it does break down what you can and can't do. And we're happy to answer questions as that emerges over time.
So I guess I just want to follow up on my question again. I understand this is a GWC process, but basically the TAC is kind of the closest thing to a GWC technical committee that exists. So like with my board members, they're looking for kind of staff recommendations and what to deal with the funding. Assuming that the city and Stafford are in a similar boat, what's the best guess on maybe the timeline that maybe the CARES Act funding and 5307 funding will be allocated to university?
My original plan was to bring it back at this meeting. There's a lot of other things going on, and frankly, this money is not going to be allocated, and, well, this money will not come into play until FY '23. So I think we've got time to make a decision. But yeah, I would say, within the next few months is when we would want to allocate it.
Well, one thing I would suggest from that technical standpoint is we are going to be moving into our budget season. For example, we start our budgets in November, December. Because we're your enterprise fund. Local governments are budget building end of January, February, sometimes a little earlier. We have to have our work done in order to take down what we hope to do, I should say, and then what you can carry, what you can take forward. I would suggest an effort to either at the November or October meetings to have some formal way of spending these dollars. We can build budgets, and then, if the ask from Fredericksburg is 34,000 from us, for example, then these funds can cover the $34,000, and Fred just gets it would be 34,000, here's the credit due to this 5307 expenditure, we're spending this money first, and therefore the motor fuel tax remains in place, and zero money is requested.
Thank you both very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this topic? We'll go to the next item, which is, let's talk about the Fall Commonwealth Transition Board meeting discussion.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. When I first arrived at FAMPO, we were about to go into the spring CDB Secretary for Transportation meetings, and I didn't have a long run-up time to prepare for that. So what I did was I took existing projects that FAMPO Policy Committee had already endorsed and requested, and we took those to those meetings. But we have the fall meetings coming up, and I want us to be a little bit more prepared for those. So I don't propose to have a discussion today. Matthew, if you can click on the next slide. What I'd like to do is to ask you for suggestions of issues that we should be raising. We don't know when the date of the meeting is going to be. The dates haven't been released yet, probably in early November. I don't know. But certainly we're going to hear at fairly short notice that those meetings are going to happen. I'd like to present a short list of policy issues or programming issues or whatever it is, infrastructure issues that we're concerned about that we want to raise at those meetings, and have it prepared in advance so that we don't have that situation where we just grab whatever's previously decided by our committee, where we actually thought through this process a little bit. And I'd like to get your inputs and prepare a summary, which I can bring back to the Tech and Policy Committee to consider and decide these are things that we need to be raised, so that we don't do this as a last minute rush, essentially. Next slide. So I don't want to have a discussion with the chair in the meeting because we don't need to have a full discussion now, but I am requesting that you email me the issues that you're concerned about, or issues that you think are serious enough that we should raise them with the CTD or with the Secretary for Transportation. I'll then make a list, and we can then look at that list and tweak it and discuss it, whatever the case is. So, I mean, think about roadway issues, bike ped issues, transit issues, resiliency, flood prevention issues, whatever you think are the big issues that need to be raised. We're not going to talk about an individual little intersection. It's not that level of thing, I don't believe, but significant issues that are not being addressed or that have fallen off the radar that we need to raise again with the higher levels of government. Is that okay? Where everybody just think through that, send me suggestions, and then, Mr. Chair, I'll bring a list of what everybody's semi-compiled for the next meeting, and we can discuss those, and I'll get your kind of tweets and changes and inputs and that kind of thing. Is that okay with everybody?
So Ian, that sounds good. What's the deadline that you want people to give you comments?
So I'd like to bring the list back to the next TAC meeting and then straight after that to the policy committee meeting. So perhaps in the next 2 weeks, ask for that in the next 2 weeks. If I hear nothing from anybody, then I'll prompt you again with an email and say, have heard nothing from anybody, please. But please, in the next 2 weeks, if you just talk to your people, I mean, it's not, you know, if you send it to me a day after 2 weeks, that's fine too. I just want to get something prepared for the next TAC meeting so that you have something concrete to discuss and that we, you know, we've given some thought to this and it's not a rush. Would that be okay? 2 weeks?
Sounds good.
Great. Thanks very much. First of all, I don't want to belabor this point.
Okay, the next agenda item is 7C, the Lafayette Boulevard Traffic Study Update with Mr. Zach Durst from Michael Baker. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go over some of the recommendations from the Lafayette Boulevard Corridor Study. This is focused on traffic, congestion, and safety. Can we go to the next slide? So this is just a quick summary of some of the things we came up with. We came up with 4 near-term recommendations at the 4 intersections that are on those bullet points, and then some potential long-term considerations, potentially widening Lafayette Boulevard, whereas the near-term recommendations try to stay within the existing footprint at each of those intersections. Some of the long-term considerations are widening a little bit more costly, and then a connector roadway to the south entrance of the VRE lot. So let's get started on the near-term recommendations. These are low-cost improvements, like I said, trying to minimize impacts to right-of-way and utilities, potentially for upcoming smart-scale applications. And then we also, when we're developing these, we want to recognize future planned improvements. And one thing I'd like to, I guess, to point out here is this study has kind of taken a long time with COVID and some of the turnover. So there have been construction projects since the beginning where we kind of had to go back and make sure that those were included in our near-term recommendations. So next slide. This is just, you know, a map showing the locations of those recommendations. And we can go to the next slide. So this is the first one. This is at Twin Lake Drive. We are recommending an R cut, basically eliminating left turns out of Twin Lake Drive and forcing everybody to turn right. And then for those that originally wanted to turn left, they can U-turn down at Brayhead Drive. This recommendation also includes sidewalk on the right side or the east side of Lafayette Boulevard, you know, just trying to extend and eventually get that whole sidewalk system in place. And so this intersection is a statewide and district level safety need. So this recommendation is going to improve safety at this intersection, but also improve congestion. The future LOS improves from a level service B to level service A in the AM, and then a level service C to a level service B in the PM. But most importantly, there's a significant decrease in future delay for the northbound through movement, and a significant decrease in delay for the Twin Lake Drive approach. By eliminating that left turn phase, we're able to allocate more green time to the heavier movements at the intersection. In addition to that sidewalk on the right side of the road, there will be a crosswalk to connect to the existing sidewalk that runs along Twin Lake Drive, but this will also require a replacement of the traffic signal at this location. So the The cost estimates are also shown here. About $2 million for the construction, about $1 million for right-of-way and utilities. And I just want to say that these are still under review and will be updated for the next presentation. Can we go to the next slide? Excellent. Okay, so this is at Old Greenwich Road. This is adding a right turn lane. Again, it mostly fits within the existing footprint. And this improves the future delay from a LOS D, a level of service D, to a level of service C in the PM, with, again, significant decreases in delay for the northbound movement and significant decreases in delay for the right turns from Old Greenwich Drive. And these are, again, the cost estimates, a little bit over $1 million for the construction and almost $1 million for the right-of-way and utilities. There is, you can actually see the shadows of some of those utility poles. So that's why that is a little bit higher for such a, I guess, a small scale project. Next slide. And this, I am showing the slide, I'm sorry, on that previous slide, I am showing that blue sidewalk that is not part of this project, but will be constructed as part of another project that's already been funded. We can move on. All right, so this is Harrison Road, and similar. This is a right turn addition. We are adding a couple other things in here for the length of the right turn lane. There'll be sidewalk again to eventually connect the entire. There's sidewalk under construction now, and eventually there'll be sidewalk along all of Harrison Road. So we're going to get that piece in. On the right side here, this blue dotted line, this is an old aerial image, but that is constructed sidewalk that is existing today. We plan to, as part of this project, connect our proposed sidewalk with that existing sidewalk, and then continue that sidewalk up the east side, the right side of Lafayette Boulevard. Again, just trying to complete that entire sidewalk pedestrian network on that side of the road. This will also require a replacement of the signal because we'll be adding heads, traffic signal heads, and pedestrian equipment. And we are keeping both of those access points to that property on the right side of Lafayette open. That is, that's a circulation and parking issue. We looked into it, and I don't think we can close one of those access points. And there's the cost estimates there, about $2 million for the construction, a little bit over $1 million for the right-of-way and utilities. Next slide. Okay, so this is much further down the corridor. We're almost to the intersection of with Route 1 now. This is at the Falcon Drive intersection, and we are proposing to make the entrance to the parking lot on the left side, eliminate the left turns from there, and make it a right in, right out. And what this does, this just again eliminates some of the signal phasing, and we can allocate that green time to the other traffic movements to improve the congestion. The future LOS improves from a D to a B for both peak hours, with significant decreases in delay for just about all the movements when you eliminate that left turn, both of those left turns. And this has a very minimal cost of construction because we're not really adding things, we're just taking things away. We're adding that one island, but we're actually removing a traffic signal head instead of adding weight to that mast arm, so we don't have to replace that signal system or that traffic signal. Next slide, please. So these are some of the long-term considerations, and I think they're great. And so let's jump into those. So this is, we're showing this a wide view of Lafayette Boulevard from just about Falcon Drive up to Harrison Road. And, you know, whereas the short near-term recommendations, we tried to stay within the existing footprint to minimize, you know, those right-of-way and utility costs. This concept is to actually widen out this entire segment of Lafayette Boulevard to 2 lanes in each direction. And obviously this increases the capacity along the roadway, but what's really cool about it is it allows the potential for a one-way pair with Harrison Road and Lassen Road. And, you know, this is not really a recommendation. This is more of feasibility, so that the next step would be to study what that one-way pair would actually do for traffic patterns and congestion and queue lengths and things like that. But what this does show is it is feasible. And if we go to the next slide, it's kind of it's a zoomed in image here. You can see we're widening towards Route 1. This is actually, you know, this image is rotated, but that's the left side of Lafayette Boulevard. We're widening to that side. And what that does is that avoids impacts to the existing sidewalk, the existing residential properties, and that sidewalk that you guys have just constructed. We don't want to mess with that. So this also allows for a dedicated left turn lane into Falcon Drive, you know, and that just increases, if this moves forward, would increase the capacity of that intersection and that signalized intersection. We're going to move further north along the corridor on the next slide. And this is, again, just showing that there's, you know, just small areas of extra pavement, and showing that yellow line is the sidewalk that was recently constructed that would tie into the Harrison Road recommendation that I showed previously. On the next slide, this is the potential VRE the south entrance new roadway. Basically, when we came up with this alignment, you can see that these red and blue squares, those are actually constraints, environmental constraints, historic properties, things like that. So we're trying to avoid those. And then when it ties into Dixon Street, Route 2, we are proposing a roundabout, and that is a hybrid roundabout. So along Route 2, along Dixon Street, there's actually 2 through lanes in each direction through the roundabout, but only 1 circulating lane. And that just makes it less confusing, and while maintaining the capacity of that roundabout. And showing the cost here, looks to be about 7.5, again, 7.5 million. These are still under review. But if you go to the next slide, it's just a nice, tight, zoomed in of what that roundabout could look like. One thing I'd like to point out is we were able to use some of the width of the existing ramp to kind of fit in a right turn lane that bypasses the main section of that roundabout. So again, these are long-term considerations that, you know, potentially would be looked at further if that's how you guys wanted to go. And that's all I have. Let's take some questions.
Hey, Zach, a great presentation. I just had a couple of quick questions. I know that there was a little bit of additional work being done with cost estimates for the various projects, as well as looking at the access management improvements. I think it was from Harrison Road going north into the city. Like, have there been any updates on those 2 items?
I'm sorry, Paul, you were a little muffled. Can you say that again?
Yeah, sorry, I'll try again. So the first issue was cost estimates. I know that when VDOT kind of looked at this, kind of at the web meeting we had a few weeks ago, There was some concerns that maybe not all the costs were included, and there's going to be some updates to that. So I guess my question is, have the estimates been updated, or if not, what is the timeline for that? Second question was with access management. I know the city and Spotsylvania kind of had a request that we passed through. Ian, basically to look at access management improvements, I think from Harrison Road north into the city. Has there been any update on that?
Okay, I think, I just want to be clear, were you asking about a shared use path? I'm still having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, somebody type it into it. Okay, let's just type it into you. We're gonna type you a message. Have a bigger mouth.
Yeah.
Okay, the call, thank you. So,
Fire it off, Paul. Fire it off.
You were going on there.
She took the first shot. Fire it off.
okay, so, I guess last week there was still some, I guess, input from stakeholders to update some of these recommendations, especially the Twin Lakes Drive. And so those cost estimates have been updated on Baker's end, but those still need to be submitted to VDOT just because we were making some late changes last week based on additional stakeholder input. Regarding the access management, the report will include not recommendations for access management, I guess, but potential locations for potential access management as development occurs or as construction takes place. What's difficult about this is, when normally when we do access management, we're not physically closing the driveways, but instead constructing things within existing right-of-way along the corridor, like a median, to actually prevent people from turning, which is, I guess, an easier process than actually showing closed access points. So those will be included in the report, and if you'd like, I'm happy to go over those during the next meeting as well.
Would be the right in, right out also considered as an improvement?
I guess I had, as part of the access management, I guess, again, I wasn't planning on giving specific recommendations, just areas where that should be investigated in the future.
Zach, if it's Ian Hollis, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
So the request came from the city, particularly for those access management indications. And the idea is that as development occurs on the corridor, they would take the recommendations or notes from this study to point out to potential developers or property owners that they would like to see these possibly redundant driveway access points removed when the development or changes on the individual properties occur, or when they get rezoning applications or site development plans get submitted, etc. That was the point. The point is the city is just looking for support in the study for where there are possibly properties with multiple access points that could be reduced, so that when those applications reach the city, they'd be able to point to this study to say it's recommended that one of those gets removed, for example.
Thank you, I am for explaining that, but I wanted to add one more thing, if it is possible, that sometimes the right-of-way also is an issue. And as you know, that from what I hear from you, that Lafayette and the city may not be widened due to the issue of right of way and expense and things like that. So you may end up working within the footprint. But if you start adding those trails and sidewalks, maybe an additional right of way of 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 5 foot, or whatever, if we know where they are needed, maybe also we could ask the developers at certain times.
Well, I did look along the corridor, and most of the commercial properties that have multiple access points, it is for parking lot flow and circulation of the lot. When or if these areas are developed, I mean, there will be a site plan approval process where they will need to meet access management standards. So, you know, it's a difficult exercise to go through and go along the corridor and say this access point needs to be closed, because then you're looking at a complete redesign of a parking lot. And you know, I don't think it's part of this study to do that, but you know, this is absolutely something we can talk about at a later date, you know, for the next meeting. But I have identified locations where they're, and it is specific, like intersection locations or locations within the intersection influence area, where access management should be looked at as development occurs.
So I had a question just for the FAMPO staff, that's with regards to the smart scale project for this in the city and possibly the regional project. Do the FAMPO staff feel like they have what they need from basically the consultant team for the October 15th deadline coming up?
I will need to get back to you on that. We're looking into the form after this TAC meeting today and starting that process, so we'll get back to you on that this week.
But it's likely that together with these drawings and so on, we will have sufficient, because this is the pre-application.
Right.
So it's likely it's not going to ask for minute details. So we probably have sufficient, but we'll let people know if there's something missing.
Sounds great. Does anyone else have questions for Zach? Great job, Zach.
I do have a question. Does that mean that the city, if you can't do the task for, you know, entrance managements, and does that mean the city has to look for another resources for another companies maybe to do those?
Well, I'm not saying I'm not doing it. Okay. What I think that there may need to be a little bit more discussion on exactly how detailed we need to get and how detailed we want to get, and some of the implications for that. You know, I would expect you'd have some pretty angry citizens and businessmen if they open a report and, you know, we're showing that their driveway needs to be closed, where, you know, they've already been granted that access. So again, I'm happy to follow up with the group and work out the best way to do that, you know, and try to satisfy what you guys are looking for. Definitely.
Thank you.
Great. So the next agenda item is 7D, Resolution 2206, 40 Transition Alternatives Program applications. This is an action item with Ms. Carrie Barber.
Good morning. So up here on the screen before you, what was in the TAC packet, 2206, to support our member counties TAC resolutions. But what I wanted to ask of Stafford was if they still wanted to put one more project in. And I spoke with Brandon before. Would you guys still like to add the Berry Farms Trail? Would you like to address everyone, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Sure, I can speak. So we are still having some decision-making going on at the county, whether we are going to continue pursuing the Belmont Berry Farm Trail 6, phase 6 of that project. We hope to have a decision made at our September 21st board meeting. And I believe the policy committee meets that Thursday.
20th.
The 20th, just before? Okay, so since we don't have a decision point regarding Belmont Ferry Farm, I'd like to see if we can go ahead and modify this resolution to include that as a third project for Stafford County.
So if that is okay with you, Mr. Chairman, we'd like to put our alternate version of this up, including that.
Yes, I support that.
All right, so in that case, we have 3 projects from Stafford County: Salisbury Drive sidewalk, Forest Road sidewalk in Fairmont Ferry Farm Trail Phase 6. From Spotsylvania County, Safe Routes to School, Chancellor Park Drive sidewalk, Germanna Point Drive Heritage Path, and Spotsylvania Parkway Extension, Smith Station Road, and the City of Fredericksburg has Bayside Trail. So, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to call for resolution support for this.
Before we do that, does anyone have any questions or comments?
This is Jamie, Mr. Chair. For Stafford County, if your board doesn't approve it, which I can't imagine they wouldn't, or we wouldn't be having this discussion, will you pull that from the process?
So our plan is if the board does not approve the Belmont Ferry Farm, we would not move forward with that application for transportation alternatives funding. But with the way the timing is with the policy committee, it kind of have to include it in the resolution to kind of hedge our bets. Just in case.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with that, but if it doesn't get approved, hopefully it will, if you vote it will, then it would be withdrawn.
That's correct.
Because that's more administrative, has no impact.
This is just a way of getting everyone their endorsement letters,
Yep.
just in case.
No issue here.
So any further discussion? I will make a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Can I say a statement? Just to make sure everybody understands, October 1st is coming around the corner. Good time right now, October 1st is coming around the corner. If you have not done everything you need to do in that portal, you cannot call me on the phone and cry me a river and tell me you didn't hit the button. Susan's not gonna tell you that, it's not gonna happen. Just, hate to say it.
Susan has spoken.
Hey, but it's not me, I already went down this road last year, or the year before, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was
It was exciting.
a tense moment, but it was come down to the fact, if you do not get everything you need in the system by October the 1st, and you get that button pressed, submit, then you will not get your application reviewed. Flat. No exception. Unless the computer breaks down and all the systems go down. That'll probably be the only way.
Let me know if
Okay.
I can help you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, the next agenda item is 7E, the Smart Scale Round 5 update with Mr. Matthew Lehane.
All right, thank you. So, Smart Scale Round 5 update, as you'll have seen, presentation in the packet. I'm going to go through it. I'm happy to take any questions. So, of course, this is the timeline where we're at. We're in September, of course. So, basically making the starting request for VDOT assistance for our basically preliminary pre-applications that we're looking at. So, of course, last time maybe everyone saw the list of a ton of projects. That's been pared down a little bit. So we have our projects from the City of Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania County, Stafford County, mixed between the two. And you'll notice we don't have projects from Fred, Caroline County, or King George County. They all submitted less than 4 or less. So there will be all local projects, unless a specific request is made or anything. So next slide, of course, we scored the projects. So the roadway scores was scored based on our LRTP prioritization methodology. You can see the scores here in order of best to worst. And you can see also 3 of the projects are ongoing pipeline studies as well. And then also the scores for the after transportation projects. This was scored slightly differently, since the projects were kind of figured out a little bit after the scoring was done. So you see the 2 projects at the top, the bike ped projects, and then the middle 2, or bottom 2, I guess, City of Fredericksburg. Those sections were each scored individually, and were merged kind of into one larger project each. And then this slide here just showing what our, looking at for what we are preliminary list for due to receive FAMPO. So on the left side there are the due to receive projects, and on the right side here are the FAMPO projects. So you'll see there's 10 projects on this list here, 5 each. Of course, it'll have to be pared down to 4 after the pre-application stage. You'll notice we have 13 projects on our original list. You'll see 2 at the bottom here, which we have said potentially won't include. And then you'll also see we merged 2 VCR trail projects in the city and Spotsylvania County into one project, then both on the list. And then basically next steps to review the list, take feedback, kind of make an initial request for VDOT preliminary pre-application assistance, as well as start the intake form by the October 15th deadline. So happy to take any questions. Mr. Go.
Comment from me, Mr. Chair, on this. What we will do is submit these on the appropriate forms in October, but we have spoken to VDOT and received clarity that any of these projects can be amended after the initial pre-application, particularly if one of the ongoing studies that are currently happening or additional information becomes available that would suggest that we make amendments to that list. So this is a very, very initial stab at this, and we will need to refine. You'll see that after some discussions between the city of Spotsylvania, there's some details on some of those that need to be tweaked or added or changed, where the sidewalk isn't going to be where it was thought to be and that kind of thing. All of those changes, according to Stephen, who I think is online as well, can still be made. There's no restrictions that once we've submitted these that we're committed finally to those particular projects in the form that they are. We can still make those changes, but they need to get an initial list so that they can at least begin to look at what kind of projects we are submitting this year. But it's a pre-application that we're doing in October.
So one question I have for VDOT basically is if a project is on a regional list for FAMPO or GWC, it goes through the pre-application and it doesn't make it, or like, you know, for further consideration, could it go on to a locality list?
So just for some clarification, what we have asked is to have a list of the projects that VDOT assistance is required. So there's no real, there's no scoring, it wouldn't not make the cut. I mean, we would look at it to make sure that it meets the criteria. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, then it wouldn't meet for anybody, is the idea. But just so that we can offer assistance and be able to put together the information you would need for an application. So this isn't like a pre-app screening type deal. This is a putting in a request for assistance from our group so that we can start looking at concepts and designs and estimates and all of those things. Because, you know, we don't have a dedicated group for something. We have to work this in with the rest of the design. So that's really what the goal of this is, to get this engine process. I know the April deadline feels like it's far off, but it's not when we look at the volume of these projects. That's very
helpful. And I guess with regards to this deadline of October 15, is it a hard deadline like October 1st or?
Mine is a hard deadline. It doesn't get any harder than my deadline. I can tell you that.
Like a pipeline study, we don't have much information on right now. If we submitted that on
So on the
November
pipeline
10th,
study,
it's too late.
if you say, we know we want to pick something that is in process on the pipeline study, you can put that information. And then a lot of it is making sure that it needs to be transmitted. Because it doesn't make any sense for any of us, for us to start working on a project, it doesn't mean it needs to go to this. So we want to do that review early on. So if you know you want to hold one of those places for something that's in a pipeline study, that's fine. But put in as much information in that Google Doc as you can. We can still know generally we're trying to make stuff.
I beg your pardon. A number of those are the pipeline studies / projects that particular localities want. But there's a pipeline study on the go in some of those particular locations. So what we're doing there is putting a project as a whole on the list with a particular location, but without describing every little detail of the project, because the pipeline study will come along and recommend a particular intersection change, which we can't anticipate right now. But some of those localities have said, yes, this particular pipeline study, we hope will produce a project and it's in that list. There's only one occasion where that isn't the case. So those dovetail with the pipeline studies in the large part.
And then the other thing I want to point out too is that if you can't make that deadline, that doesn't mean that that's an application that anyone could submit. That the deadline is for us to assist. So if you went to a consultant and had all that information developed by someone else, then that's an option as well. In our district, that's typically not what we've seen. And then we would still, as the district, have to review all of that information. So we would still need, whatever it is that's developed for us. But we just want to make sure there's time so that any of the supporting studies can be done, and then all of the other information gathering can be done on the front end. Scrambling and putting together applications that are disjointed in various ways. We've seen those issues.
That makes sense, thank you.
Just, I guess it should, so if you can submit a pre-application and then you can make changes, but they can't, can you like sub a project out for another project, or does it have to be changes to that specific application?
What you submit to the pre-app should be your project. The changes should be pretty minor in nature, I would say. As far as swapping it out, that's not something that you could do without approval outside of the district.
Okay.
And I think there's only very rare instances that something like that has been allowed. There's going to be some other kind of reason for it other than we changed our mind or the board voted differently or something like that.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because I know, especially a lot of the, like Northern Virginia, transit agencies, they'll try to do that. But, and then I had another question. So I'm assuming you guys are still working out the scope on a lot of these projects, but I'm curious if any of them have transit elements, and if they do, if you guys can coordinate with the RPT to make sure that,
Yeah, if any do, we'll make sure to coordinate. As we go through the intake forms, we'll do a process to, if there's any transit elements, we'll make sure to talk to you guys about that.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if any or how many do have transit elements at this time.
So I guess I had another couple quick comments, especially with PCR regional project. It's possible for FAMPO staff just to do kind of a quick kind of graphic of what that looks like. And then I guess with the Route 2 and Lansdowne road improvements, I know that at least from the Spotsylvania perspective, we haven't really talked about the Lansdowne road much more. So I was thinking it might be useful to have another kind of call like we've had a couple of them, which was beat out the city to talk through that. So we may be interested in adding on to what the city is proposing.
If you look at your calendar, there is already calendar invite to a meeting to discuss those two joint projects.
Okay.
There is an amendment, this Lansdowne Road title preceded our last meeting last week. So that project already has a number of little tweaks that we have to bring about, but the tech packet has kind of already been prepared and gone out by the time we had our call. So there are a couple of little changes that will happen.
Yeah, so that may be updated to the policy.
Yeah, it'll be adjusted.
Okay. And I apologize. When is that being set up?
On September 23rd.
30. It's, I've sent it down to the slide, so
I think it's
it'll
next
be
week.
on.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
yeah, it's the 23rd.
Any other questions for Matthew? Okay, moving along, the next item on the agenda is 7F, congestion management process, CMP performance monitoring program overview. Also with Matthew Lang.
Okay. So as some of you are aware, FAMPO has basically a CMP that was created back in 2019 by Terry Barber. And this is following up with that. they said that we were gonna do a performance monitoring program. So to monitor basically our CMP roadways and kind of their congestion data, whatever it may be. So this is going to be going through that. So of course, yeah, CMP, accepted in 2019, identifies congestion problems in the network of major corridors, determines the causes of congestion, and develops and evaluates alternative multimodal strategies to mitigate congestion. And basically, this is a measure of progress to implement strategies in reducing congestion. So we're required to have a CMP as part of the DC urbanized area, the TMA, as well as a link to where the federal, or section of where the federal requirements of CMP are found. And all of this is taken care of in the CMP document. So FAMPO CMP corridors. So I-95, Route 1, Route 17, Route 3, Route 2, Route 610. One of the things you'll notice, the CMP was done in 2019. At that time, we still included all of Junior Receipts, the rural localities. Of course, for this now, we are just doing FAMPO. So just the FAMPO corridors that you see there.
Does everybody understand why that is? The federal authorities have asked us to split FAMPO work from the rural work. So we now have to do that.
Yeah, so our current CMP, of course, includes, for instance, US 301, further down Route 2. But for this effort, what we're doing, we're just including FAMPO. So basically, the performance monitoring program is an important component of the CMP to monitor congestion data over time and help assist in future CMP updates and helps identify potential congestion areas that can assist in transportation project selection. And basically, the code requires a periodic assessment of effectiveness and strategies, and these results can help decision makers and the public. So our program basically developed a data dashboard. There's a link in our packet as well as this agenda here for this presentation, where metrics on each quarter in the FAMPO region are viewable. Metrics are currently viewable for April through June of 2021, so doing it on a 3-month period, so this is 4 times a year, for the weekday and weekend time frames for 3 metrics. Congestion, which is the congestion percent, the measure of speed as a percentage of the free flow speed. Speed is average speed within the corridor in miles per hour, and then the travel time index, which is the travel time represented as a percentage of the ideal travel time. So travel time divided by free flow travel time. And those are straight from the Redis platform. So really, initial takeaways from our first look here is, from the performance monitoring program, is Route 1, the city near Falmouth Bridge, has major delays during most times on the weekends, while all other locations are comparatively to that doing well. So if you're trying to go anywhere on Route 1 near Falmouth and the city of Fredericksburg up to light, you can't get anywhere really. On the Route 2 corridor, delays can exist throughout the full length of the corridor on weekends, so there's a little bit of congestion through all of it on the weekends. And then weekends on the I-95 corridor going southbound are worse in Stafford County, while for northbound, delays are worse for the city of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania County. So on to the next steps of the data dashboard. I'm going to do a quick overview of the data dashboard just so everyone can see. This is what the dashboard looks like. On the left side there is a little bit about the tool and kind of how it works. And then you can see applicable for this current set of data. And we'll add kind of as we go updates on other timeframes. So for the next timeframe and so on to the dashboard here. You'll be able to view it on this page. It's also viewable from our website under the CMP. So once you click on your specific date, you'll get each section, each roadway. So they're viewable here. For instance, we can click on Route 1. And then we get a nice, pretty image of congestion for all of Route 1, for northbound and southbound direction, for all 3 of the months that we selected. On the left side here, we can select whatever data we would like. So we can select the weekday or weekend congestion percentage. So you can view the congestion on Route 1 during the weekday. You can view the speed on the weekends. You can see the kind of slower speeds. And the bar at the bottom is your legend for what the average speed is. And for instance, same thing for travel time. You can see the big delays around Falmouth, Route 1, the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford County here that I was mentioning earlier. And of course, definitions at the bottom left here, and you can go back to the main menu to view other roadways, or you can go back to view other timeframes. So happy to take any questions on that. This dashboard we're looking to update every 3 months for the previous 3 months of data. The next update would be July through September, sometime in the coming months.
So Matthew, the dashboard looks great work with that. A couple of quick questions. Basically, is the CMP going to be updated as part of the LRTP update?
On into that, we're gonna make minor adjustments to it to get it in conformance to where it can stand right now.
Okay. And then basically, this isn't a request right away, but I guess I'm just curious, like with Spotsylvania with Route 2A, that's primary. At some point, like what would be the process if we wanted to add that into the CMP network?
Pass that on to Adam or Carrie for CMD.
So currently, it's not part of the federal requirement for whatever reason
Okay,
that we update that road, so that would be a process.
so is that like a federal kind of process? Is it based on like functional classification?
It is.
Okay. There might be an update with the next functional classification. Okay. That's great.
I do want to make one comment. This was not, in 2015, this was done by consultants, the CMP, and they said that they were going to do this very thing, and they never did. So this has been 6 years in the making, and Matthew has finally done it for us, and I think he's done a great job. So I just wanted to mention it.
Great job. All right, next, the next agenda item is 7G, the CMAC and STBG project selection process update. Adam Hager and Jordan Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick update on the CMAC and STBG process that we started talking about last month as far as the more comprehensive update we're be making this fall into the winter. Again, right now, in September, we are working on a draft of the new document. It's based on the LXP methodology that the FAMPO committee approved this past May. October, we're going to present a working draft. Our target is to have about 70% of that complete for review next month, and we'll kind of include in that document some placeholder question marks that we can discuss at the town meeting next month in more detail. In November, we'll be able to have that draft complete so that we can have a full review. In December, there's no scheduled committee meetings that you'll see on the agenda, but we'd like to set a short TAC meeting for December 6th. We'll talk about that right after the presentation. And then in January, of course, the policy committee doesn't meet in December, but in January, we're going to seek approval and then start the FY23-28 call for projects process. As far as that process goes, so the next slide, thank you. We'll do application intake, screening, and scoring in February, present scores in the draft applications in March, and then in April, approve allocations. And it's 1 month ahead of what we did this past spring. The CTV will consider those allocations at their June meeting as usual. So as far as this update in particular, there's a few kind of in the universe of inputs that we're using for this update. A few things that we're using. One is comments that we received and that we developed over the course of the spring process. So in particular, I just want to highlight these 4 things. And if there's anything else that comes to mind, we're happy to take those either in this meeting or you can send an email to us. But we want to talk about the number of applications for the eligible applicants funding program, the process for reviewing it and adjusting the draft scoring. So with that one in particular, we've noticed one thing Richmond does is they will, with each applicant during the scoring process, have a one-on-one meeting to go through any details that need to be worked out, any corrections that need to be made, answer the detailed questions. So that's something that we'd like to implement with our process as well. We want to specify the data sets we want to use in the scoring process just to have it clear from the start where the data is coming from. If we're looking at congestion, we're looking at safety, whatever the metrics might be. And then how committed funding is accounted for in the scoring process. So this gets back to basically how we define it, just so it's on paper in black and white so we can all see it in the same place. One thing that we're relying heavily on is a lot of the really good work that Richmond and Hampton Roads have done over the last few years. Richmond, in fact, just updated their project selection process this July. So they've done just a really good job of kind of modernizing their process, and we're pulling quite a bit from what they've done down there. Again, we want to utilize language tools, lessons learned, but again, make it appropriate in scope and scale for Fredericksburg. So we want to make it something that fits us, our staff resources and capabilities, and not just copy what other folks are doing. Next slide. Again, 3 other things that we pointed out this past spring that we wanted to use. One is to use for the scoring the LRTP project prioritization methodology as roughly 80% of our project scores. So taking how it would score the LRTP process and then adding in the STBG's case, the benefits of the TMA that we went through this past fall and past spring, And then for CMAQ, there's a lot of air quality evaluation tools. We've been working with VDOT over the last week or so on identifying what the most appropriate tools are for that. But that's a project to be eligible for CMAQ, of course, has to have a documented way of improving air quality. We want to specify the allocation and program process for one of the activities of something where it takes out a lot of the guesswork and it's on paper, kind of again in black and white that says, here's exactly how we're going to do this, so that everybody's on the same page at the start. And also ask applicants to provide a little bit more information in project submission. So we've had the same form roughly for the last few years or so. That's kind of high level basic information. So we want to get more information on the front end so that we can have a thorough scoring process that can be reviewed with the TAC and the policy committee as the process goes each year. Next slide. Next step, comments are still welcome. We are working on the draft right now. So please feel free to give us a call, send an email. And again, next month, we're looking to have a working draft presented to all committees with about 70% complete. So that's where we're at right now. Happy to take any questions.
So Adam, I had a question just with the schedule. I know that this is a very ambitious schedule to do all of this. And I guess I just wanted to ask a basic question. Is it really necessary for FAMPO to approve allocations for this by this committee?
Susan?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
So basically, the schedule presented has, FAMPO approving allocations for CMAQ and STBG by this April. Is that really hard to?
Not necessarily, because I'm hoping you're gonna get numbers from March, but it will not. It's gonna depend upon if we can get it completed in April, you present at May, and then approved in June. But it would have to be then.
That's in June or approved at the CEB.
So
Let me ask.
your
this,
meeting, your meeting is after the CTV, isn't it?
Our
We have to
policy,
look at dates,
our policy committee meeting in June would be somewhere around about the 20th.
and I have to look at when the CTV is there.
The reason I say this, sorry, Paul, to interrupt. The reason I say this is that it's very unusual for FAMPO to approve a big funding allocation the same meeting that they see it for the first time.
Oh, yeah,
So
no,
we
yeah,
like-
they usually do, that's why I said May, you could do it May and then June, but after the CTV meeting would be after those, I think.
We may need to present the draft in, what does it say there, but April, if we're going to approve it in May, so that you can get it.
Yeah, you have to present a draft in April and approve in May. So you're having it approved in April. You could push it 1 month.
Yeah, again, it's ambitious.
You could push it 1 month, but I don't know if you could push it 2.
Yeah, so we
I
want,
have to take a look at the CTV meeting, but you can have it presented in April and approved in May.
I can just see a phone call from you in June saying, hey.
And if it, well, and here's what happens, let me tell you, this is not, if it does not get approved, what happens is though you cannot spend any of that money that is allocated at that time. It has to pretty much stop, and then until you get approved,
You mean CTV approval?
until you get policy and CTV approval.
So like if FAMPO, let's say, were to approve allocations in August, this is CTV deadline, but then would not count for smart scale?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're talking August, I'm meeting June.
Well, I'm just trying to understand, like, is this, scheduled, like, if we want to change something for this coming allocation, it sounds like, kind of the end dates on this schedule.
Okay, so let me say this. If the board wants to change something after June, so the 6-year plan is done and approved in June, okay? If there are some changes that y'all want to make to any of your line items for the June CTV, it can happen by the policy and then by the CTV approval. But as for the entire plan, we need to have that pretty much wrapped up, before CTV approves the entire 6-year plan. Does that help you?
Yes, that's helpful. So,
But I mean, if there's a line item that y'all choose to change, we can change it after.
But as for like changing the entire thing like we have done in the past, that gets a little bit more.
So you need some form of an approved list that will serve as the CTV in the June meeting.
Yeah, so we can move forward with the 6-year plan. Then, if y'all choose to make changes on a line items, you have that right.
So I guess with that being the case, like with, this schedule kind of being more fixed, for the end dates, I guess I'm just concerned that this is really ambitious. I think we need to have more meetings. I think one, we would definitely need to have the December meeting. But I think basically we need to maybe get out of the framework that we can only discuss this at. I think we should set up a work group, which is probably a smaller, more focused group, similar to what was done for the STBG kind of benefits for you, kind of meet more regularly, not necessarily meeting in person. Maybe we do a lot of the meetings by GoToMeeting, maybe something more like bi-monthly. Try to kind of work through this fall if we're going to meet this schedule. I guess I want to just see what Stafford and the city think.
So just before you have that discussion, and please do have that discussion, just go back to that slide where you said what you're going to rely on to do this. There is, no, it's not that slide, but never mind, I'll talk to it. The proposal is to use what you all agreed on for the LRTP scoring as the majority of the scoring process, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel completely. And then make some adjustments based on what staff have learned from Hampton Roads and Richmond and so on. So while it is ambitious to write an entire policy, the assumption I think we're working on is that a good chunk of the policy is going to be based on stuff we've done for the LRTP with some change. So it might not be as big an effort as we had to do for the LRTP because we're going to rely on some of that work that's already been done, if that makes sense.
So I understand that thought. The concern I would have is that was kind of based on smart scale, which kind of favors more kind of compact, kind of smart growth. And from at least Spotsylvania perspective, we don't want the CMAQ SDBG to be based kind of like the smart scale kind of scoring process. We would like to do things differently. So we would have some concerns with kind of just on the LRT prioritization methodology for CMAQ and SDBG.
I'd have to echo those concerns. Just don't know if it, I think the process we did for the long range plan was good, but I don't know if that directly correlates into just the mitigation of air quality and how to score those projects for those type of funds. So I would kind of echo some Paul comments with.
I think having gone through this process and looking at the criteria, I think we need to go through the process, look at the criteria and agree on all of the stuff that it includes in the definition. Because what we can't do is start from scratch. End up doing is what we've done for the GWRC funding. We've gone over this for almost a year and a half that I've been here, and we're not making progress. So I think we need to start somewhere, because if not, we're not going to get anything done in time. All of our elected officials asked us to do this last year, and if we're going to come back to them and tell them, hey, we are still not there, I can't imagine having that conversation at FAMPO. So if there's something we can, because I think the last discussion we had was that if anybody had comments to specific things related to this criteria, speak now. And if we're speaking now, after we said that we were going to have those conversations written and back to you, I'm a little concerned that we have not moved the needle. That's my comment.
So I understand that comment. I guess, when we talked about this a little bit back in August, that we didn't have all of this information to kind of react to. And I think like at this point, maybe we could say we could get some initial comments in the next 2 weeks. But I guess what I'm saying from Spotsylvania's standpoint, we're probably going to have some major comments that could be significantly different from what's being proposed on this sheet, in this presentation.
One of the problems with the current process, I think everybody agrees that the past CMAQ prioritization methodology was significantly flawed. And one of the reasons for that is because it did not clarify a whole range of details, which made it very subjective. So we ended up with a process in the end where it became a bun fight to a much greater degree than it needed to be. If you looked at the way the LRTD process was handled, there was a whole lot less so far of a bun fight in terms of that process. Really, so that process clarified a lot of detail. Which specific data set needs to be used, what exactly is included and not included is spelled out in a lot of detail. So the proposal is to look at the current CMAQ process and compare it with the LRTD process, which is, I think, more successful. We don't want to go back to a CMAQ process that because it's rushed and it has to be done by a certain deadline, we end up with these vague lists in the actual new CMAQ prioritization methodology, and we then have another bun fight in March or April trying to get an agreement on a list of projects because the past year started day over scratch, and it takes such a lot of time to get agreement from localities on every single one of the school details. I'm just nervous about this idea that we should throw out the entire thing and start with this blank sheet. We're never going to finish in that case in time because the three localities are very robust and they have very robust ideas. And if you don't start with at least something on your plate in front of you, you need 2 years, because to get agreement is difficult with this group. And we're trying to start with at least something on the page that can be changed, obviously, but something concrete on the page.
So I understand that. But I guess I think with the ORTP, you're not dealing with real money. Basically, there was quite a bit of funding, so basically almost all the projects were selected. So that's, I think, why you didn't have a voting fight. If there's a situation where a lot of projects weren't being selected, there could have been a voting fight for that. I said with the CNAC and the NCPG, you're talking about real money that the localities kind of care about. So I think there needs to be a little more sensitivity to the process. I'm not saying throw everything out. I mean, I think one with the existing methodology, I don't think that all of that should be thrown out. I mean, certainly the subjective criteria that are qualitative, I think maybe a lot of that has to be changed significantly. But I mean, just like with the accident data and the congestion, also one of the concerns that Spotsylvania had was not that kind of the criteria were wrong, but that it wasn't executed properly. So that's something we could talk about in kind of more detail. But I do think it's necessary to meet on this more than once a month or once every 2 months. To have a more focused kind of work group, kind of meeting probably on a bi-weekly basis. We're going to try to meet the deadline by basically kind of getting a methodology where it can be approved by FAMPO. I guess in January is kind of the goal.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing just for project intake, that process, I mean, that's something that I think it would be easier to get agreement on more quickly. That could maybe be on a more accelerated timeframe than timeframe compared to the rest of the prioritization methodology. And maybe that's something we could, maybe if we work together, we could actually get that approved something like November. So maybe that process can kick off earlier. One of the concerns I have with the project intake is, let's say with most applications, that are comparable to this, let's say like the I-395, 95 meter choice, revenue sharing or TAP, you don't have like a 1 month turnaround on like kind of when the call for projects is, when the applicant has to kind of give information back. And I know that historically there wasn't a lot of information kind of requested by FAMPO, but FAMPO is looking to have a more robust methodology, which we don't have an issue with, but with the kind of the process of getting kind of the county figuring out what its project should be. A lot of times, I said it's possible we have a committee structure. Sometimes you need resolutions of support for things. So trying to do something in 1 month is very tight. I mean, I think, really kind of long term, it's something like 2.5 months is what you need for that. And if you look at kind of 395, 95 and revenue sharing TAP, and that's kind of what they have. So if there's a way that we could get kind of consensus, FAMPO and approval kind of on the project intake process, and a call for projects could be done in November, that would maybe give more time for that. And then maybe the actual prioritization methodology, maybe that's not final anymore.
think we're open to that, Paul. The only hesitation I think we might have with that is that it would be a little bit disadvantageous to the applicant if they don't know all of the scoring that's gonna take place if that hasn't been approved yet. So that's the only hesitation I have, and I think we're open to having that conversation. As far as the looking ahead beyond this year, trying to do a big update to the methodology, we want to start the buffer projects a lot sooner than January. So for instance, I know Richmond and Hampton Roads, they start early in fall. So I think Richmond in fact has already opened up their application intake process for the next SIP. So we do, even though this year we can't quite do that because we're working on the document itself, we do want to have a much earlier and a longer application intake timeframe that we want to work into the language of this update.
The particular concern I have, and I'm not speaking for all of the staff, this is my own opinion, is that our process last time was fraught not because it wasn't applied correctly, but because the policy itself is so outdated and it has so many gaps that you can literally drive a bus through. So what, for example, Alex would see as something that could be included, Paul might see, or Jamie might see as not being something that could be included. And we have got to close those gaps so that there is, and before we get to an individual project, before we're talking about project X, we agree on the policy of how we're going to deal with any project, including project X. So by the time we get to project X, the methodology is very clear. Which data set are we going to use, for example, for the road safety metrics? Which data set we're going to use? So we actually specify it in the policy, so that we don't have this ambiguity closer to the time when we're actually looking at projects and we have to apply the metric. And the metric isn't quite clear as to what exactly is used. And then we have to go on past experience and current opinion among the team. Or I want to take that opinion out of it and focus largely on tightening up all of those parts. And we learned from that last CMAQ process. It wasn't a good process. And I mean, I think there's unanimous agreement that the CMAQ prioritization methodology that we currently have is very old and it has lots of gaps and needs that need to be clarified in this at this point in time, so that we don't have as much disagreement, as much difficulty applying it in future, because it's clear exactly what the detail of each thing needs to be. Definitions, I remember somebody here that spoke about definitions. We needed tighten up definitions. What exactly does this mean? And all that kind of detail we want to really tighten up so that we have a good process done.
Mr. Chair, if I could just speak from the last go around that we had with methodology, you know, we did have a lot of tech involvement in the evaluation process. There was a lot, and Mr. Charles, we're absolutely excited about the potential with the steps to bring to the table here, closing those gaps and eliminating some of the ambiguity. But there were a lot of kind of big ticket ideas that were discussed offline and during some of the subcommittee discussions during those several months that were kind of more like fundamental changes to the way we approach both the CMAQ and SCG evaluation process. And I think what Chairman's mentioning is more to what extent can we be involved as committee members in what staff can bring forward. Certainly seeing what comes next is going to be great. We're excited to see that, and perhaps being able to vet that within the particular time frame before the schedule that we see is moving pretty quickly. I kind of support the notion of reconvening that ad hoc committee that we had. I think Alex chaired that last time around, just so we can play a closer role in the evaluating of that and maybe bring some additional recommendations that staff might be bringing up through the long-range strategic plan methodology process.
So there's no suggestion that you should all be putting in your input in terms of this whole process. There's no suggestion that that is the case.
I think Jamie.
Yeah, so I think moving forward, if we're gonna have those smaller meetings, I don't have any issue with it. However, we've got the framework, everybody has had this information, this is not new. If it's new to you, I apologize. But I really do think we need to make sure that whatever we're gonna do is consistent and moving forward. I think Alex ran a tight ship and made sure that we progressed in those meetings. But to say, I don't think we should move forward with projects, because then we're just gonna make it very hard on our leadership to say, oh, we're gonna do exactly what you told us not to do last time. Because we all basically got 3 projects each, and that just doesn't make sense to do that again. So if we're gonna meet, I don't care if we meet every week, every 3 days if y'all want to. But I just do not want to go to city leadership and tell them again that staff has done this again for a whole year and we didn't do anything you told us to do. Because if we look at the FAMPO minutes, all of our leadership told us not to do this again. And I'm hearing we're about to do it again. So what do we need everyone around the table so you have enough information to review in advance? And if Alex is willing to lead the process again, let's do it. Like I said, we can meet as frequently as you want, but we cannot go into this process again, in my opinion, because I'm telling you, somebody's gonna pull up the meeting minutes and the TAC people who are responsible are not gonna be in a good spot with their leadership. And I can't do that because I don't want to hear Matthew Kelly's feedback to me to say, Jamie, you didn't do your job, or Jason Grant. I just don't want to do it. So please help me keep my job. So what do we need to do?
So I think we need to have a kind of a focus work group like we have for the SDG benefits. And we need to maybe meet, next, Wednesday, October 10th.
First Monday, I think it's the 4th.
Can I ask a question? If we come up and if we finally come up with a scoring process on how the money is to be distributed, are we going to have everybody agree to it? And then it stays there until things, because I just feel like every time I feel like we have gotten to that point of we've gotten over that hurdle and this is how life's going to be. It's like somebody comes along and goes, nope, it's not right. I can get all the money, or they got all the money, something like this. And I just feel like we have to keep going down this road every single budget time.
And to your point, I think if we don't focus on the money, that's the problem. And we say, do we agree with this criteria?
Yes.
Do the fatalities in a certain corridor count? Then you're done. But
Because I don't
on anything else.
I don't think everybody's ever going to be super happy with what they get out of this process, meaning the dollar amount, because there's not enough dollars there. And I'm totally, and I am the first one to beat the band that, you need more dollars here. But this is what we have to work with. And if you get 5, and you get 4, and they get 1, are we going to be happy? Or are we going to, after the process is come, do we come up with this new process? And if the process doesn't go our way, then next year we have to change it again. I guess that's my only question.
So I hear what you're saying, but we've never gone through this process before. Basically, there was the SCBG benefit that was done, but a whole scale kind of updating of the CMAQ and just the SCBG other than the benefit, that hasn't been done. So with respect to the comment from the city and VDOT, we haven't done it. Yes, my expectation is when we kind of agree on what that was to be, we're going to stick with it.
Okay.
We're not going to keep doing it.
If we get this, and we get this, everybody in agreement, whatever the funds lay out, we'll all be good with it.
Yeah.
Well, then,
Paul, if I could ask,
you put that in there.
do we want to go ahead and confirm the December 6th meeting date for the TAC?
Yeah, I think we do need to have a special attack meeting on December 6th.
And then do we want to pick a date for the first newly established subcommittee for this?
And just clarify who's on this.
Yes, so just one thing with the dates. So that's my thought is basically with the TAC. So this month we're meeting later because of Labor Day. The TAC meeting on October 4th, maybe we don't need to meet with the special subcommittee before then, but should meet at some point shortly thereafter. And I'm thinking just with comments from the FAMPO localities and just FAMPO members, including PRTC, we should really set a deadline for that, which I think should be at least 2 weeks. I guess with the subcommittee, I guess my thought is to be focused on kind of the FAMPO membership, since that's kind of who ultimately needs to approve this.
So can I just clarify? If it's the FAMPO membership, is it everybody in this room? I understood it's going to be a smaller group, or am I missing this one?
Well, what I'm thinking is should really be focused on the FAMPO voting membership.
Okay.
be a smaller group.
So like
So
one.
others could attend, I guess, if they want to, but it'd just be, at the end of the day, it's going to be the FAMPO policy committee has to approve it. If there's not buy-in from that group, then we're going to be back to where Susan said.
So there's one from each of those. That's what we're saying. I'm just asking for guidance.
Well, maybe if there were kind of two per FAMPO locality, and maybe one from PRTC, maybe one from VITA.
Oh, yeah, we have money, so I guess we should be.
That's right.
So 8 people, that's the one here, plus family stuff.
Yes, I was in FAMPO stuff.
Mr. Chair,
Would you like to attend?
Yes.
yeah, I'll ask that,
Sorry.
Christine.
I'll ask that, since PRTC represents VRE, if their involvement in this committee, I'd like, if VRE can participate as an observer, but also ask PRTC if they can coordinate directly with VRE on any VRE concerns regarding to the development of the prioritization and scoring methodology, so that anything specific to VRE type projects is included.
Sure. Did anyone else have a comment?
Is there any action, Mr. Chair, today, or it's just a sub informal agreement?
There's no action required to establish a subcommittee.
Just a quick, just component of that, the membership as you listed, but I do recall, and I think it's for CMAC and RSVP, RSVP funding. Any eligible recipient of those funds in the region can still submit an application for those funds. Not saying we are in this case, but I remember in Hampton Roads, the National Park Service could apply for those grant applications. So I do just want to put that out there, that just because we are around the table does not mean that we are the only people who can access certain funds.
So we will schedule a meeting, thanks, Jamie. We will schedule a meeting for 9 people plus member staff. And when do we want to schedule that meeting?
Maybe the week of October the 11th. You know that like the 11th, I think is still a holiday. Maybe it's a point in that period of the 12th to the 15th.
So just before the policy committee, after the check and before the policy.
Yes.
Adam, can you suggest that?
If we could do Friday the 15th, that would be ideal for our side.
Okay, that can work.
All right.
And I'm thinking a go-to meeting, web meeting.
That is, I believe, the DRE operations board meeting, so we are looking at.
Yeah, what time are you
You
thinking?
do it in the morning.
Thursday the 14th in the morning.
So what time in the morning were you thinking?
6 o'clock.
Could be more like mid, maybe like 10:30.
So 9 people plus FAMPO staff, Thursday, October the 14th at 10:30 a.m. online on the go-to meeting app. Everybody happy with that?
And what are you sending us beforehand?
So you've got the existing methodology. That's what we've asked for comments on over the last month. So that's anything that's in there, anything, best practices that you pulled from elsewhere, seen done differently elsewhere, that's what we want to get on the table. We're hoping to have a little bit more for today's discussions, and we just sort of have what we've proposed. I think based on today's discussion, I think we'll target a slightly lower completion percentage based on the fact that it seems like there's some different ideas about the overall approach here to have ready for the October TAC meeting. And then that can lead into this first subcommittee meeting on the 15th.
So by when do you want to have comments from the?
As soon as possible.
Latest. Next
I'm
week.
reading it 2 weeks.
We have time, I'm sorry, my brain is. That's what I think.
So 14 days from today, you have all your comments in on the current methodology, what's wrong with it, and what we should, if you have suggestions for fixing it, we need those within the next 14 days. Is that fair?
Yes.
So September 27th?
Monday the 27th, yeah.
Is it open for, I'm sorry, Jane.
No, please.
Is it open for everybody to attend, even if we're not on the committee?
We will have to make it a public meeting, so it is open to the public.
So one major comment, and I know kind of Camp Rose and Richmond do this, is that the SPG and the CMAX probably have two different methodologies. We could have some overlap, but it should just be one for both.
Yeah, it's gonna be in one document just for administrative purposes, but the process to score and allocate funding is wholly separate.
Okay.
Can you send out a meeting invite for when comments are due with a 1-day notice? So that way nobody can, when I say nobody, I mean me, because I'm gonna forget, so.
Yeah, just so we're clear, close of business, September 27th.
Don't say close. Let it not be.
People that already know they're not gonna make the close of business deadline in 2 weeks.
No, I mean, what is business? I'm in training.
Okay.
Fine, midnight.
Any other comments on this topic? Okay, great. Let's go to the, well, do we need to take action on the meeting date? Okay.
Unless somebody objects, we're fine.
Okay, we're good. Next item is 7H, Resolution 2207, approving the 2050 ORTP physically constrained project list. This is a action item with Ian, Jordan, and Adam.
If I can just make some introductory remarks while Jordan is getting ready. Remember, the reason why we need to deal with this item now is that the congestion process has to begin. So you've seen this before. Some tweaks have been made since you saw it the first time a month ago. And this is the slightly revised version. And we're looking to make progress on this item so that we can begin the congestion mitigation process. It obviously goes to the policy committee after our meeting today. And then if the policy committee meeting is happy, we will then begin the congestion mitigation process as part of our overall LRTD process. So I'm going to hand over to Jordan to just go through the presentations, and then obviously we'll take questions and comments.
So I want to start with the agenda. There are 5 things relating to LRTD on the agenda. We have 2 resolutions. The first one being 2207, that's approving the list to be brought to the policy committee. And then the second resolution at the end, this is just approving and endorsing the list to go to air quality conformity, which is a federal requirement, which will happen in October at the ICG meeting. We also have received several public comments. Those are attached in this link. There's about 10 pages of public comments, and they're really informative, so we have time to read through them. Some of them are about specific projects, some of them are general comments to the document and to the draft list. We have the draft list included as well that has all these updates that I'm going to go through here in a second in the presentation. So now you want to open the presentation and go to the next slide. So there are several things that have happened since August. There's 3 main ones. We adjusted funding costs that have double counted funding from the highway and active transportation elements. We have looked at including all the transportation alternative projects, which was previously presented on by Carrie. We want to make sure that that's included in our CLRPG because that is a requirement to have in the application process. And then we have also adjusted some out-year inflation rates due to some feedback we received. And then the project list is attached in your packet for review. So the first thing I want to talk about is double counting of costs. Some of the applications had overlapping elements. So this means that a highway project included potentially a sidewalk or a shared use path. That was also included later in the active transportation list. As to not double count the funding for the specific element that is the same, we added or separated the project. So for example, if a highway project had a road widening, but also included a shared use path in that widening, we separated out the widening project separate from the shared use path. And that will be reflected on the highway list as just a highway project, and the active transportation list as just the active transportation project. So there's a one-to-one comparison for cost. So there's nothing new or changed with the cost. It's just being separated out in more detail in the list. And that resulted in adding 7 projects. If you go to the next slide, you can see what those projects are. So on the left-hand side, we have what the roadway is, and then the corresponding element of active transportation projects, and then that's how we changed that and made a proposal and walked through those edits. So if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't see it. We wanted to include all the transportation alternative projects. As per review, we have 2 of them that were scored in the 2050 candidate project application process that were not included in the initial CLRP draft list. So we wanted to include specifically 2 projects in Spotsylvania and Stafford on the CLRP as that's a requirement for the TAP application process. So we went and brought this to BPAC, and they had concurrence that this should be treated as an exception in the scoring process, and that this funds was used because we had, again, some double counting with the roadway pipeline study for Route 3, and then the plank infill. So those projects were added through this funding here. And then lastly, we had our consultants Cambridge systematically review the LRP list and just make sure we're kind of in compliance. They noted that we don't compound interest year over year. So we made that adjustment accordingly, and you can see the compounded interest rates here. And we changed some of the scopes and down estimates just to adjust for this inflation rate, and had no substantial changes on the list. Lastly, here are the projects that were selected out of our candidate process. And then, again, the methodology we used, which is the same that we presented last month. And then lastly, this is the general review of all the 2050 draft list that is attached in your packet. There are 343 projects, again, broken down by mode and locality, and then by cost at the end. And I can take any questions that you guys have on the updates that we had from August.
To Jordan, I just want to say, I think you and the FAMPO staff have done a great job with this. We're supportive of this, and I'll say if there's no discussion, we would basically move for approval of resolution 2207 as well as resolution 2208.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Both motions pass.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate that.
I guess we're down to correspondence. Do you get any correspondence?
Stacey, you've got, do you want to just talk to the public comment?
Sure. So this is a rather lengthy public comment, so in the interest of time, we're not going to read it in full, but it was contained in your agenda packet. This is from Jane Leach, who is a Spotsylvania County resident, and she's just laying out different items, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, onward, of things that need to be changed or improved with regard to the transportation system in order to have more equitable public transportation, pedestrian and sidewalk accommodations and things of that nature.
Thank you. The next item are staff reports.
Matt, if you can just bring up that. So I just wanted to point this out, Chair, and if I'd like all of our jurisdictions to please look at that page. This is the CTAC membership list, and it indicates where we have vacancies on the CTAC. And I would encourage all of our jurisdictions to please pay attention to this. We have, for example, Spotsylvania, we have 6 open seats on the CTAC, and we really do need to fill a couple of those seats. Stafford, we have 3 seats open, etc. If you just look at those, Stacey will make a comment in a moment, but we do have 1 new person that's indicated that they would be prepared to be a delegate from Spotsylvania, but I see Stacey wants to make.
No, actually, just a correction there. So both of those at-large seats, we're working on a resolution today and asking the policy committee to fill those 2 at-large seats. One will be from Spotsylvania County. That's the person who gave that lengthy correspondence there, Jane Leach. And the other one is Tamara Banks, who is the Fred travel trainer. She's from Stafford County. So those two hopefully will be filled on the 20th. And I did send Stafford Spotsy some information this morning about that.
Okay, so please do pay attention. We are now publishing the vacancies, just the number of vacancies on the website for the DPAC, for the CPAC, et cetera, et cetera. So please just encouraging localities to look at those. And, you know, if you're one of the localities that could submit some more people, think about folks that we could recommend or ask to serve on the CPAC or the DPAC. We're glad to have them from our localities. Yeah, please.
There's two other items we have the staff reports. The fact that one is an update from FAMPO on the new service transportation bill. So this is just a snapshot of what was sort of circulated in kind of late August. So there's about 6 or 7 pages in there that sort of spell out what some of the expectations might be for NPOs should pass as is. And then lastly, Matthew, scroll down to the last page, we have a calendar update if you want to go over what everyone's. We've updated this calendar now for FY22, so this takes us out to June 2022. Of course, we're in September now, October. We discussed already that the TAC meeting date is October 4th. We'll have that special subcommittee meeting, the first one at least on October 14th, so we'll add that to this calendar. In November, we tentatively have listed November 8th for the TAC meeting date. And we're hoping for a little bit more of a buffer between the TAC and the policy committee that month. So we're proposing and working with the chair to do November 3rd, which is a Wednesday in November. So we want to see if there was any objection to doing Wednesday, November 3rd for the November TAC meeting date.
So that date is fine in Spotsylvania.
We can make that work.
Everybody good with that?
What time on November 3rd?
It'll be 9:30.
Oh, 9:30.
Great, so we'll do that, and then we do have the December 6th date in your office.
And can the FAMPO staff just send around the updated calendar?
But that gives you at least a whole year in the future to look at your dates and, you know, well, almost a year. Great. I think that's it. Let's start reports.
Okay. So we'll go to member reports, maybe start with Stafford.
Sure, don't really have much to report. We're kind of, working, like Susan says, to wrap up our revenue sharing and TAP application by October 1st. So we're still waiting on some information from our board. I hope to get that to September 21st meeting and then kind of finalize at least those applications for TAP, get those in. And that's all for Saturday.
Any updates from DDOT?
October 1st, 5 p.m. That's to be buried in your brain, burned there. Oh.
I'm feeling it. I see you giving me the hard stare. Okay. PRTC?
First day for us starts on Monday, September 7th. That's kind of our first big increase of ridership for that year. We're starting to see a little bit more ridership trickling with the Delta variant. FTA extended the mask mandate into January, and here we go.
Yeah. King George?
I know we're currently working on a revenue sharing application. Should be finishing that up shortly. And we're gonna finalize our smart scale projects here pretty soon.
What's your date?
I'm sorry, October 2nd?
DRT?
Yeah, so we just kicked off our transit equity and modernization study. Basically, a needs assessment on the equitable delivery of transit services and the modernization of transit in Virginia. It is a legislative requirement from the 2021 session, and we selected Kimmy Horn as the consultant. And there will be opportunities for transit agencies and for the public to participate in the study. So we will have several meetings. Just ask that you keep an eye out. She'll be sending something out. And then I mentioned, oh yeah, Smart Scale, if you have any potential transit or rail projects, to just make sure you coordinate with DRT. That's it.
DRE?
Not a whole lot of info. I mean, our ridership continues to tick up, but the increases are relatively slow. Had some challenges the last month or so with some of the weather-related delays, flooding concerns that affected our service. So the on-time performance wasn't where it's most desirable, but are continuing to focus on building ridership back up.
Do you have August ridership numbers? I've asked Matt to make a graph for me of all of the transit operators in our
Yes,
area.
I can send you the.
Send to Matt, thank you very much. Same for Fred, I'm gonna ask you the same question.
And then Christine, is the ridership kind of survey still kind of scheduled to go? I forget when it was, if it's late October or November.
It's usually the first week in October, and
Okay.
the master agreement survey, Bob, is that a go for this year?
There's gonna be some variation on the theme of Chris
Okay.
Henry. We already closed.
Okay.
that they were-
Yeah, because I had not heard anything about that.
I did want to mention that our ridership dashboard is now live. It comes out with each of our board packets. So any of your staff that wants to look at what are the trends, you just go to the most recent board packet, and it usually has like a 1 month lag from there. So it's not going to be as current as we would like, but it breaks it down by route with performance and other types of routes that are certain staff are making.
Thank you.
Well, hey, just wanted to introduce myself, Nick Ruiz. I just started less than a month ago with BRE.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry, I guess I thought you'd already attended with these meetings.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're wondering who this strange person was sitting next to Christine, used to be at DRPT down in Richmond on the rail side, moving up to Alexandria. So
I guess Nick's been on some calls, so I assumed he'd been at this meeting too.
don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Welcome to the jungle.
Yeah. Thanks.
So Fred in the city?
Yeah, so we're starting our hour early implementation on October 18th. So it's affecting Spotsylvania County, Fredericksburg, and Stafford. That's a big project now, getting everything ready for it. We've been doing a big push hiring operators, we'll be fully staffed and ready to go for that. So that's a big update. We're just getting ready for DRPT grant season, trip grant, as far as capital grants, all that kind of stuff too. We're getting all of our funding squared away. So that's the one operation thing that we're working on now. Again, like we already mentioned, we're starting to see a little uptick in ridership. We're also, like Bob said, with the mask mandate, we're also monitoring the Delta variant. We're making sure we do everything we can to keep our riders safe, and we're also monitoring our routes to see how our ridership is going. So just like always, just monitoring the COVID situation and seeing how it affects us.
I know you all love laughing at me, but can you imagine a transit system that starts buses early enough to take you to work?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, what a radical idea.
You know?
No update from the city. We're doing everything y'all are doing.
It sounds great. In Spotsylvania, I have two updates. One, we had our first bond referendum meeting, basically this past week on the 9th. We have a second one scheduled for October 21st. I'll say that it's the bond referendum for everything, which is about 400 million. The transportation component of that is 101.7 million. So if you live in Spotsylvania, please vote for it. Remember, we appreciate your support.
Oh, I have the ability to vote.
That's right. The second thing is we are hiring basically a transportation planner. It's on the Spotsylvania website. So if you know anyone that's interested in that, please refer them to that. And I guess one clarification. So next month, the ICG is meeting at 9, so we need to be here at 9. Okay, great. That's it. Anything else?
No, Mr. Chair, I wish Spotsylvania well with the long referendum, and thank you all for attending. Just the last thing is, we just offered to make a presentation to the Stafford folks, so if you could just gather at the front of the room at the end of the meeting, and folks who want to stay and mingle, we just encourage you to go to the back of the room. There's coffee there and snacks outside. If we could just spread the group like that, so that we can just sit at the front and give Stafford that virtual brief.
So a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All in favor? Aye. Any thanks.